All right, so we turn now to the second way, Aquinas' second way of arguing for God's existence. And as I mentioned in the first video, this is sometimes called the argument from causality to the existence of an uncaused first cause. Specifically, it's called the argument from efficient causality to the existence of an uncaused first cause. And I said a little bit about what that means in the first video, but let me elaborate on it a little bit more. So, as you know, from what I've said in the earlier videos, Aquinas is building on a foundation that he inherits from Aristotle, who's the biggest influence on Aquinas. And Aristotle famously distinguishes between four kinds of cause. When we're looking for the explanation of a thing, Aristotle thinks, there are really four elements to a complete explanation, which he famously calls the formal cause, the material cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. That terminology actually comes from later than Aristotle, but the idea is there in Aristotle. So the material cause of a thing is that out of which it's made. So in the case of a brick wall, say, the material cause would be the bricks. The formal cause is the form or the pattern that the matter that makes up the thing has taken on. So in the case of the brick wall, the bricks have been organized into the form of a wall as opposed to the form of some other object like a random pile or a doghouse or something like that. So there's the material cause, the stuff out of which a thing is made, and the formal cause, the form or the pattern that stuff is taken on. But there's also what's called the efficient cause, which is what brings a thing into being. For example, a stonemason in assembling the bricks into a wall would be the efficient cause, or the worker together with his tools and so forth would constitute the efficient cause of the wall. And then there's the final cause, which is the end or goal or purpose that a thing serves. And in this case, in the case of the wall, that might be to provide privacy for, let's say, those who live in the home that the wall is adjacent to, or what have you, or to provide security. Okay, that would be the final cause of the purpose of the wall. So we have these four causes, and the different arguments Aquinas gives, to some extent, you can match them up with one or other of the four causes. And in the case of the second way, the focus is on efficient cause, just as in the case of the fifth way, the focus is on final cause. So the second way, or the argument from causality to an uncaused cause of the world, is again specifically about efficient cause, or the kind of causation that involves bringing something into existence or altering it in some way. And it's what we usually think of these days when we use the word cause. Excuse me. So just like in the case of the first way I mentioned, that Aquinas, when he talks about motion, is using the idea in a broader sense than we're used to today. In the same way, the idea of a cause is understood by Aristotle and Aquinas in a broader sense than the way we tend to understand it today. We tend to think again of efficient cause, and that is, as it happens, the focus of the second way. Now, what Aquinas argues in the second way is that we find in the world of our experience that things are ordered into series of causes and effects, where one thing brings another into being, and that in turn brings another thing into being, and so on and so forth. And he argues, just as he does in the first way, that a series of causes of this kind cannot go back to infinity, but must have a first member. For if it didn't have a first member, if we weren't able to trace the causes and effects back to something that can cause without itself being caused, then we'd have no explanation for whatever causes and effects we started out the argument with. So, for example, if we started out noting that, say, the cool air in the room cools down my coffee, and why is that? How did the air become cool? Well, because the air conditioner went on. And why did the air conditioner go on? Well, because somebody went and turned it on and so forth. So we have a series of causes and effects. And if we can't trace this to a first cause in the sense of something that causes other things without itself being caused, then Aquinas wants to say we would have no explanation for the examples that we started out with, the fact that the coffee is cooled down by the surrounding air, say. Well, why is that the case? Well, here, as with the first way, Aquinas is appealing to a certain kind of cause and effect series. And once again, it's important not to misunderstand the nature of the argument. It's very easy to read the second way and to think that what Aquinas is saying is that we trace the series of causes and effects backward into the past we'll get to a beginning point, to the Big Bang, say, and then we've got to ask what caused that. That, again, is not the kind of argument Aquinas is giving, because for the sake of the five ways, he brackets off the question of whether the universe is infinitely old or had a beginning. Because, as I've said, he doesn't think you need to get into that in order to demonstrate God's existence philosophically. And in fact, he thinks it can't be shown one way or the other via philosophical arguments, but we'd have to appeal to divine revelation to know whether the universe had a beginning. And in particular, when he traces the series of causes back to a first cause, in the second way, just as in the first way, he's appealing to what I called in the previous video a hierarchical or essentially ordered series of causes rather than a linear or accidentally ordered series of causes. He's not talking about cause and effect sequences, in other words, that trace backward into the past, but rather he's talking about cause and effect sequences, all the members of which exist here and now. So I use the example in discussing the first way, not here, I just borrowed Aquinas' example, of the hand which pushes the stick, which pushes the stone, where the action there is simultaneous. At the very moment the stone's being pushed by the stick is in turn being pushed by the hand in turn at that very moment is being caused to move by the firing of the motor neurons and so forth. And I said that this sequence of, as I put it in the previous video, actualizers has to trace to a purely actual actualizer, or to use less technical language, a mover or changer which is itself unmoved or unchanging. It can actualize the potential of other things without itself having to be actualized. Now, Aquinas is saying something very similar in the second way. When he talks about the series of causes having to trace to an uncaused cause, what he means is that the sorts of causes that exist here and now, where the elements of the series exist here and now simultaneously, like the stone being pushed by the stick, being pushed by the hand, have to trace to a cause operating here and now at the head of that sort of series, as it were, that actualizes all those causes without itself being actualized. So, again, the kind of cause and effect series he has in mind in this argument, as with the first way, is this hierarchical or essentially ordered series. And it has that name because the earlier members of the series, it's essential for the series to exist at all that the earlier members of the series operate at every moment at which the series exists at all. So there's an essential connection between the causes and effects in that case. Again, he's using that kind of cause and effect series in the second way, just as with the first way. Now, this naturally raises the question, well, what exactly is the difference then between the first and second ways? The second way starts to seem like just kind of a variation in slightly different language of the first way, in which case, what's the point of giving the argument? Well, as it happens, though they are closely related arguments and they end up at the same conclusion, the starting points are importantly different. And here's one way to understand it. In the first way, what Aquinas is trying to explain is why the world undergoes change from moment to moment. Why it is, you might say, a dynamic universe rather than a static universe. What is it that keeps the universe moving along and all the objects and processes that make up the universe carrying on from moment to moment, as opposed to the universe being sort of frozen in place? Like, why, in other words, is the universe like a movie rather than like a still photograph? And then he argues that ultimately we can only make sense of that if there is an unmoved mover who keeps the world moving, keeps it changing, while itself undergoing no change whatsoever. But in the second way, he's concerned to explain an even deeper fact about the universe, which is that it exists at all at any particular moment. Suppose we had a universe that was indeed static, that was more like a still photograph rather than like a motion picture. Would that mean that there would be nothing in need of explanation? And Aquinas' view is no, that wouldn't follow at all. We would still need to know why it is that the universe and the things that make it up exist at all, even at this, single, timeless, unchanging moment, rather than there being nothing in existence. And that could be the case only if there is an uncaused cause which actualizes the universe, which causes it to exist, though it is itself not actualized or caused at all. So again, the difference is that in the first way, what Aquinas is trying to explain is why the universe is dynamic rather than static, why it undergoes change from moment to moment. In the second way, he's interested in the deeper fact that things even exist at any moment, and would exist even if they were unchanging, and wants to explain that. So it's the sheer existence of a thing, the sheer existence of anything at all rather than nothing, that is the focus of the second way. Now he ends up, again, at the same place. He ends up with a divine cause that actualizes everything without itself being actualized. That is common to the first and second way. It's the starting points that are different. It's what it is he's trying to explain by appealing to the existence of God that differs from the first way to the second way. Now, as I mentioned a couple of videos ago, the arguments that Aquinas gives in the five ways are arguments that are presented just in a kind of summary fashion, and they're not spelled out in all the detail that Aquinas could have spelled them out with, and indeed which he does spell them out with in other places. And I mentioned that the first way, the argument from motion, is one that he develops in much greater detail in another work of his, the Summa Contra Gentiles. What about the second way? Is that something that he presents elsewhere? Well, this is actually a question of debate among Aquinas scholars about how exactly the argument of the second way relates to things Aquinas says in others of his writings. There is, for example, an argument that Aquinas gives in a little book of his, famous book, famous among Thomists anyway, followers of Thomas Aquinas, and very influential among them, that he wrote very early in his career, that goes by the title in English, On Being and Essence. And he presents there an argument for God's existence that begins from a distinction he draws between the essence of a thing and its existence. And he argues that application of these concepts forms the basis of an argument for the existence of God as a first cause of things. Now, I'm going to say something about that argument in a moment, but the point I want to make for now is this, that this is an argument that Aquinas not only presents in this little book On Being and Essence very early in his career, but it's the main concepts of which he returns to time and again throughout his writings, this distinction he draws between the thing's essence and its existence. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. So the concept, this distinction between the essence and existence of a thing, is obviously something that's very important to Aquinas, and he again repeats it over and over and deploys it in, among other places, the Summa Theologiae. And yet that specific argument, that way of using those concepts to form the basis of an argument for God's existence, is not one that he clearly presents in any of the five ways. So some commentators have wondered whether in any of the five ways is Aquinas intending to restate in a somewhat different way, in the Summa Theologiae, where the five ways are set out. Is he intending to restate in different words this argument that he presented earlier in his career in this little book On Being and Essence? And I suggest in my book on Aquinas that it's actually the second way that is the closest to this earlier argument of his from the book On Being and Essence. And that one way to understand the difference between the second way and the first way is to read Aquinas' second way as a restatement, a kind of simplified restatement of the argument he gave in this earlier book. That's definitely a controversial point of interpretation. Not everybody would agree with me about that, but some would. In any event, I would suggest that it helps illuminate the second way and to understand exactly what the point is, what Aquinas had in mind in presenting the second way as a distinct argument from the first way. So let me say a bit more then about this argument that he sets out in this little book On Being and Essence that he wrote earlier in his life. It starts out, as I say, by drawing a distinction which becomes very important in Aquinas' overall philosophy between what he calls the essence of a thing and the existence of a thing. Essence versus existence. Very famous doctrine in Thomist philosophy, in the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. The real distinction, as he calls it, between essence and existence. What does that mean? Well, the essence of a thing you might characterize as what a thing is, whereas the existence of a thing is the fact that it is, the fact that it exists. So what does that mean? And why should we think that there's a distinction between these two things? I like to use the following sort of example. Suppose you're trying to explain to somebody, maybe a small child who'd never heard of these animals before, what a lion is, and what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, and what a unicorn is. Suppose this kid had never heard of any of these creatures. What's a lion? What's a T-Rex? What's a unicorn? So you say, okay, let me explain to you what these three creatures are. And so you give a complete description, and maybe the child has a photographic memory, and he's very bright, so he can, he hears what you say and he remembers all of it. You give him a description of what a lion is, of what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, and what a unicorn is. And you ask him, you got it? And he says, yeah, I understand. Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I understand what you just said to me. You've described for him the essences of each of those creatures, what it is that makes them the specific kinds of animals that they are. Now, suppose you went on to ask him, okay, now that you know what each of these creatures is, you know the essence of each of them, let me ask you this. You ask him, you tell him, look, of these three creatures, one of them still exists, and you can go see it in a zoo if you'd like to. Another used to exist but has gone extinct, and the third is entirely legendary, never existed, just a made-up creature. Now, based on your knowledge of the essences of those three creatures, can you tell me which is which? And the answer, of course, is that he would not be able to do it. That there's nothing in complete knowledge, even a complete description, a thorough description of the essence or nature of what it is to be a lion, what it is to be a T-Rex, and what it is to be a unicorn, that would tell you of any of those creatures which of them exists and which does not, and which of them exists but has gone extinct, as opposed to never having existed at all. Now, of course, we know that the lion is the one that still exists, the T-Rex is the one that used to but has gone extinct, and the unicorn is the one that never existed, but it's a purely mythical creature. But knowing the essences or natures of those three creatures is not what tells us that. And so the lesson Aquinas would draw from this is that the existence of a thing is a distinct aspect of it from its essence or nature. Hence, we have this doctrine of the real distinction between essence and existence. Okay. Now, that's a general point of what's called metaphysics. And you might wonder that's all well and good, but why is that interesting? And why is it important when discussing arguments for God's existence in particular? So let me turn to that. Because Aquinas wants to emphasize that a thing's essence and existence are distinct, not just before it comes into being, but at any point at which it exists, even after it comes into being. A lion here and now, or a stone here and now, or a pencil here and now, is the sort of thing where its essence or nature, what it is distinct from its existence, the fact that it is. Indeed, that's exactly why something like a pencil can go out of existence. There's nothing in the essence or nature of what it is to be a pencil that entails or requires that it exist. Existence, you might say, has to be added to it if it's going to be a real part of the world. And that's why, again, you can destroy the pencil. You can, as it were, remove its existence from its nature or essence, and leaving you with nothing, right? Leaving with no more pencil anyway, but only, say, crushed wood or shavings or whatever it is you've reduced it to. Okay, so at any moment at which a thing exists, its essence and existence are distinct. Okay, whether we're talking about a pencil or a stone or a lion or a human being or what have you. Okay, now what that entails in turn for Aquinas is that at any moment at which a thing exists, a stone, a lion, a pencil, say, because its existence is distinct from its essence, if it's going to continue as part of reality at all, if it's going to exist in any moment, something must be imparting existence to it. And that's true, again, not just at the moment at which it first comes into being, but at any moment at which it exists at all. At any moment at which this pencil exists, there must be something imparting or adding existence to its essence or nature. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. Same thing's true of you and me. There must be something, as it were, adding existence to my nature or essence here and now, or I wouldn't be here. Okay. Now, what is this thing that is doing this? Let's call it C, whatever it is. It can be the molecular structure of my body. It can be the laws of physics. It can be, an angel, or an elf, whatever you want, doesn't matter. Let's just call it C for cause of my existence, for what's adding existence to my essence or nature here and now and keeping me in existence, keeping me as part of reality at any particular moment. What is C itself? Is it God or is it something other than God? Well, what Aquinas wants to say is this. Suppose C is a further thing whose essence and existence are distinct. Whether, again, that's the laws of physics or particles or an angel, whatever. If its essence and existence are distinct, then there must be something adding existence to it here and now to keep it in existence so it can go on to keep me in existence. So that what's true of me, namely I need a cause here and now to keep me in existence, which we've called C, that's going to be true of C as well. C is going to need some cause to keep it in existence here and now so that it can keep me in existence here and now. So let's call this cause of C B, to be uncreative about it, right? So B is adding existence to C's essence so that C will exist, so that C can add existence to my essence so that I will exist here and now. Well, you can see where this is going. If what's true of me and what's true of C is true of B as well, then there would have to be something outside B, let's call it A, which is adding existence to B so that it can add existence to C, so that it can add existence to me and keep me in existence here and now. Notice what we've got here is a cause and effect series of what I called in the previous video a hierarchical or essentially ordered sort, where every member of the series exists simultaneously here and now. At any moment at which I exist, or the pencil exists, or whatever it is we're starting out with, there must be something outside it, call it C, keeping it in existence. And if C is something whose essence and existence are distinct, there would have to be something outside it, call it B, which is keeping it in existence, and so on and so forth. But this kind of series, as we've seen, Aquinas argues cannot go on to infinity, or we would never have an explanation. We would keep, as it were, passing the buck and never giving an ultimate explanation of what we started out with, namely the existence of the pencil or the existence of me here and now. The only place the buck can stop, as it were, is with something that can cause existence in other things without having to get it from some other thing. Something in which, as Aquinas puts it, there is no distinction between its essence and its existence. Its very essence or nature just is existence, just is being itself, as Aquinas puts it, so that it doesn't have to get being or existence from some other thing. It is, as it were, maximally built into its very nature. And unless there was something like that, Aquinas wants to say, then there would be no explanation of how anything exists here and now, including me, including the pencil, including you, or anything else for that matter. So in order for there to be anything in existence here and now, where the things that we're talking about are things whose essence and existence are distinct aspects of it, in order for those things to exist at all here and now, there must be something that causes their existence, where in it there is no distinction between its essence and its existence. Its very essence just is existence or being. Okay, now that, as with the conclusion of the first way, leaves us with a very abstract characterization of this first cause. It's a first cause of the existence of things whose very essence or nature just is existence or being. And because its very essence or nature is existence or being, it doesn't need, and indeed couldn't have, anything outside it giving existence to it. Now, it turns out for Aquinas that to be the sort of thing whose very essence or nature is existence, to be what he calls subsistent being itself, to be something which just is pure existence itself, as it were, is another way of describing what he describes in the first way as pure actuality with no potentiality, something that can actualize without being actualized because it's already, as it were, fully actualized with no potentiality. Something which is pure actuality with no potentiality, something whose very essence just is to exist, or just is, as it were, to be actual. These are really two different ways of describing one and the same thing. So that everything we said about the unmoved mover of the first way, we can also say of the uncaused cause of the existence of things in the second way. If indeed the second way is, as I'm suggesting, a kind of simplified restatement of this argument of Aquinas's from his little book on being and essence, which he spells out in terms of the distinction between essence and existence. Another way to think about the relationship between the arguments is this. Aquinas tells us that the essence of a thing considered by itself is a kind of potentiality, whereas existence is a kind of actuality. It's what actualizes that potentiality. Think of it this way. Once again, you consider the essence or nature of what it is to be a lion, or the essence or nature of what it is to be a T-Rex, or the essence or nature of what it is to be a unicorn. All three of these things, just considered in the abstract, just considering their essence or nature by themselves, each one of them is a merely potential kind of reality. It only becomes an actually existing reality when existence is added to it. In the case of the lion, there is, you might say, because there are actual lions in the world, there is, as it were, existence added to the essence or nature of being a lion. In the case of a unicorn, however, unicorns are and always only have ever been potentially existing things. They've never actually existed because existence has never been added to their essence or nature, as it were. Whereas T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, that's the kind of creature that once existed but no longer does. So you might say that where at one time the essence or nature of being a T-Rex was actualized by having existence added to it, that's no longer occurring since those things have gone extinct. So the essence of the thing corresponds to potentiality, its existence corresponds to actuality, and there must be something actualizing a thing, a T-Rex, a lion, or what have you, by adding existence to its essence or nature if it's going to exist at any particular moment. Okay, so as I say, this is an argument Aquinas gives in his little book on being and essence, and I would suggest that second way is a kind of simplified way of giving that argument, though that's a controversial point of interpretation. And then, as with the first way, Aquinas goes on later in the Summa to argue that anything that fits the description of the God whose existence he's argued for at the end of the argument, an uncaused cause in the case of the second way, would have to have all the divine attributes, would have to be all powerful, all knowing, all good, eternal, and so on and so forth. All right, so next we'll look at the third way, and we'll see how in that argument Aquinas appeals to yet a very different starting point in order to arrive at the same conclusion, namely the existence of God as traditionally conceived. So we will see you then in the next video.